afternoon, you're watching the Debka File, a weekly roundup of exclusive news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East, broadcast to you live from the heart of the region. Coming up on the program today, Israeli jets destroy the new Hamas terror tunnel. U.S. bases to stay in post-war Syria. Trump extends Iran's sanctions waiver. Shakeup in U.S. State Department. Israel destroys the first Iranian ballistic missiles in Syria. Islamic terrorists obtain the first strike drones. Turkey gains a Red Sea island base. And now to our top stories. The Hamas tunnel, which Israeli jets struck on Saturday night, broke new grounds. Still under construction, the tunnel began in the southern town of Rafah, which Gaza shares with Egypt. It crossed 180 meters into Israel, passing under Kerem Shalom, the main gateway for delivery to the Gaza population. Debka File sources report that Israel gave Cairo a heads up on the airstrike, prompting Egypt to impose a curfew on the Rafah area. The IDF technology that was used to beat the terror tunnels may now be shared with Egypt, and together they would start destroying the network of arms smuggling and terror tunnels serving Hamas and crossing through Sinai. The land blockade of Gaza will then be complete, and Hamas could possibly do one of the following: accept Egyptian and Fatah terms for reconciliation and government sharing, unleash a rocket attack on Israel, or appeal to Hamas's allies, Iran and Hezbollah. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has been making plans for post-war Syria, including a decision to keep the U.S. bases in Syria in their current 10 locations, most of which are in Kurdish and minority areas. Debka File reports that this policy reversal came in after Russian President Putin stepped away from partnering with Washington in the planning of Syria's future. Instead, he opted for collaborating with his allies, Iran and Turkey. This appraisal last week was strengthened with the delivery of Iranian ballistic missiles to Syria without a word of dissent from Moscow. The U.S.-Russian relations could take a downward turn as the U.S. sends a message to Moscow and Tehran that it plans to remain in Syria, both militarily and politically. A large section of northern Syria, 3 times the size of Lebanon, has been designated a self-ruling entity and is assigned to the Kurds and other minorities who will enjoy autonomy under U.S. patronage. They will also be protected by 2,000 U.S. Special Operations Troop and Air Force personnel serving in 2 U.S. air bases and 8 military outposts placed throughout the region. The U.S. will help train government officials and offer help in the reconstruction of war-torn buildings and infrastructure. A new North Syrian army will be established to oversee border security under American supervision and raise barriers against the return of ISIS. The Trump plan won its first step in the race against the Russian-Iranian bid to dominate Syria by staging local elections in the designated new region. It was made clear that the U.S. must be included in all decisions regarding Syria's future, including the fate of the Assad regime. U.S. President Trump has extended the waivers on the Iran nuclear sanctions. This has kept the 2015 nuclear accord alive. He said this would be the last time unless Europe agrees to overhaul the nuclear deal on ballistic missile development and uranium enrichment before the next deadline in May. In addition, Trump clamped down on new sanctions on 14 Iranian entities and individuals. The most prominent is on Chief Justice Ayatollah Sadegh Larijani. The new sanctions are designed to deter him from giving harsh penalties to the protesters. Tehran has accused the U.S. of crossing red lines by sanctioning the Chief Justice, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, and had this to say on his Twitter account. Trump's policy in today's announcement amount to desperate attempts to undermine a solid multilateral agreement, maliciously violating its paras 26, 28, and 29. JCPOA is not renegotiable. Rather than repeating tired rhetoric, U.S. must bring itself into full compliance, just like Iran. Meanwhile, the State Department is being overhauled in order to implement Trump's policies. David Schenker, the director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, has been assigned as the top Middle East position at the State Department. He was the director of Levant Affairs at the Pentagon, in charge of Syria, Jordan, Palestinian affairs, and Lebanon during the Bush administration. He is the second non-diplomat to receive a high State Department appointment since Trump became president. Trump and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson have been replacing the Obama administration diplomats who have been known to antagonize Israel.
Well, I think that people have to, and states have to act rationally. Certainly, every state wants to defend its own people and its own interests, and I think that we have to realize that. On the other hand, if we act rationally, we'll see that it's not necessarily to provoke another state. I think there are so many things that both Islamic states and Jewish state can cooperate on. There's no need for all this unnecessarily conflict.
Last week, Iran tried to deploy a consignment of Khorramshahr ballistic missiles in Syria for the first time. This was a major escalation of its threat, not just to Israel, but to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the U.S. military bases in the Gulf region. The Khorramshahr, developed from a North Korean prototype, has a range of over 2,500 kilometers and carries multiple warheads up to 1,200 kilograms. It also carries radar-evading capabilities. Israel jets went into action as soon as the Khorramshahrs reached their assigned base near Al-Qitaifa, west of Damascus. They conducted 3 strikes to make sure the deadly weapons were obliterated. Debka File also disclosed that it was the first instance of U.S.-Israel military collaboration in the Syrian war. Their proliferation to Syria supported President Trump's demand to tag a ban for Iran's ballistic missile program on the 2015 nuclear deal as one of his conditions for recertifying it again in May.
They're trying to establish an empire, a territorial empire, from Tartus to, or rather from Tehran to Tartus in the Mediterranean, enveloping the Middle East also from the south through Yemen, eventually conquering the Middle East. This is what Iran is about. We are absolutely committed to preventing Iran from forming such a base, a military base, in Syria. And we back our words with action. We have a long-standing policy to prevent the transfer of game-changing weapons to Hezbollah from Syrian territory. This policy has not changed. We back it up as necessary with action.
Meanwhile, Russia has a serious vexation with its ally, Turkey. It took the Russians a week to discover who supplied Syrian Islamic rebels with 13 advanced strike drones, which swarmed over 2 Russian bases on January 5th and 6th. Russian air defenses overcame their navigation systems and brought them in, while anti-air missiles destroyed another 7. The Russian intelligence had been concerned over who could have given the Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham the technology for their first airstrike capability for attacking the Russian military. Debka File sources have revealed that the Turkish MIT intelligence service was the culprit. Ankara's objective was to twist Russian arms into holding back a major operation by the Syrian army, Hezbollah, and pro-Iranian Shiite militias in order to capture Idlib from rebel hands. This is due to the fact that Turkey President Erdogan struck a secret deal with al-Sham Group's leader, Abu Mohammed al-Julani, to grant Turkey control of Idlib without having to deploy Turkish troops for its conquest. However, by January 12th, Moscow had caught on to Erdogan's plans, and Russian special forces stormed the depot that had been housing the drones used against their bases. They proceeded to destroy them all with high-precision artillery shells. When the drone gambit failed to achieve its purpose, Turkey turned to threats. Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yildirim claimed that attacks in Syria's rebel-held Idlib will spark a new wave of migration.
İdlib'de saldırıların artması orada yeni bir göç hareketine, yeni mağduriyetlerin oluşmasına sebep olacaktır. Yani milyonlarca insanın yaşadığı yerde siz terör grubuyla sivilleri nasıl ayırt edecek? Suriye'nin barış sürecini akamete uğratmaktan, kesintiye uğratmaktan başka hiçbir işe yaramaz. O bakımdan özellikle rejime Rusya Federasyonu'nun ve İran'ın bu konuda daha fazla telkinde bulunması zorunlu hale gelmiş.
Here in the studio to discuss these issues is Dr. Martin Sherman, CEO and founder of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We just heard the Turkish Prime Minister saying that continued attacks in Idlib will cause further victimization. Do you agree that by issuing warnings to the Syrian regime, Russia and Iran could resolve this?
Well, I find the Turkish policy a little difficult to follow because, firstly, if they really were behind the drone attack, that is likely to antagonize Moscow rather than co-opt their collaboration in dealing with this issue. But again, you know, the question is, why should Russia and Iran answer the call? Because Russia and Iran and Turkey have divergent interests, to a certain extent at least, in Syria. Russia and Iran are interested in Assad remaining in power, whilst Turkey is against that. So I'm not quite sure that this is a logical policy appealing to Russia and Iran to pull the Turkish chestnuts out of the fire.
Many claim that the Khorramshahr missiles are a modified version of Korean missiles. Can you describe the details of these weapons and the potential threat that they pose?
Well, I only know what's been published in open sources, but they're a little as fearsome as the original report put out. They have a range of about 2,000 kilometers with a head of 1,800 kilograms. There are rumors that they have radar evading abilities. I'm not quite sure if that's true. The Iranians have been claiming that since 2006. But I think the Iranian attempt to import missiles, whether they're ballistic or precision-guided missiles, is very worrying. And I think any discussion of Iranian activity in Syria cannot be dissociated from two issues. Like, isn't it lucky that Israel didn't evacuate the Golan? And all this is a product of the failed Obama policy, which actually has enriched, empowered, and entrenched the current regime, making any chance of regime change very remote.
We just heard Prime Minister Netanyahu stating that Israel would prevent Iran from forming a military base in Syria. What is Israel currently doing to counter these threats?
Well, at least overtly, Israel is reported to be attacking strategic targets whenever these become too great a threat. What they're doing covertly, we can only imagine. I would imagine, as the former head of Mossad, Meir Dagan, advocated, they should be cooperating with other covert services to try and bring about some regime change in Iran. And hopefully the recent protests and demonstrations in Iran may be the first swallow that heralds a new spring.
Do you think Israel might face a backlash from their strategy?
Well, what's the alternative? You know, the alternative is letting Iran set up a military base and establish its military prowess within Syria, which I think is an inadmissible scenario for Israel.
This was the first instance of U.S.-Israel military collaboration in the Syrian war. What future collaboration might be in the pipelines between Israel and the U.S.?
Well, I'd be surprised if this was really the first instance of collaboration. I don't think there's any overt military collaboration, but I'm sure there must be ongoing intelligence sharing, technological cooperation, and I would be surprised if this doesn't carry on in the future.
Dr. Sherman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Afghan lawmakers tried to convince the Kabul government to stop Iran's use of Afghan Shiite recruits for its war in support of Bashar Assad in Syria. Over 10,000 Afghan troops that were deployed in Syria have been killed or injured over the past 5 years. On January 9th, Fazal Hadi Muslimyar, chairman of the House of Afghan Parliament, had this to say, quote, Iran is abusing Afghan refugees and sending them to the war in Syria and Iraq, where more than 2,000 Afghans have been killed. I'm calling on the Afghan president, the chief executive, and the Foreign Affairs Ministry to lodge a complaint with the Iranian ambassador on this matter. There are currently 2.5 million refugees living in Iran, of which 2/3 are undocumented illegal immigrants. Many came to Iran to escape persecution as Shiites, while others have tried to avoid imprisonment. Iranian officials have reported that there are 20,000 active combatants recruited by Al-Quds commander General Qasem Soleimani. This Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps lures poor and undocumented Afghan refugees with offers of financial compensation, housing, and other incentives. Yet most of their promises are not kept. These Shiite refugees, after reaching the Iranian border with their families, were given asylum only after agreeing to work for 2 years outside Iran, for which they were promised $300 per month. They were then given only 2 weeks of basic military training before being shipped off to Syria. For the majority of victims, the payments were never made to their families following their deaths. Sadly, most of the 10,000 families of the dead or wounded have been forgotten. Debka File military sources have reported that Egyptian and United Arab Emirates military and security leaders have held a meeting with Sudanese opposition representatives from Darfur and East Sudan in the Sawa base. Suakin Island, located just off Sudan's Red Sea coast, is a valuable link between Ethiopia and surrounding regions. It was once a center of Islamic civilization, but lost its Middle East empire in the early 20th century. On December 24th, Turkey President Erdogan signed several accords with Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. One of these agreements granted Ankara the lease of Suakin Island. This lease sent warnings to Cairo, as well as Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, as they feared that the union would allow the Turkish army to get close to United Arab Emirates bases in South Yemen. They were concerned that Erdogan's purpose would be to establish a strong military and naval base, and Suakin would be yet another Turkey base, in addition to Mogadishu, Somalia, and Qatar. Now to a roundup of this week's regional headlines you may have missed, the news in brief. Abu Hamza Hamdan, brother of senior Hamas operative Osama Hamdan, suffered severe leg injuries from an assassination attempt in Lebanon on Sunday. His BMW, which was parked outside his home, blew up when he opened the door. He was taken to the local hospital for emergency surgery. On Sunday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the creation of the Hezbollah Financing and Narco-Terrorism Team. This group of prosecutors and investigators, experienced in international narcotics trafficking, terrorism, and money laundering, will take charge of the cases against Hezbollah's supporters. They will start by assessing the documents stemming from Project Cassandra, a law enforcement initiative targeting the Iranian proxy's drug trafficking and other crimes for funding its terrorist operations. Mysterious extraterrestrial rocks, unlike anything ever found on Earth, have been discovered by scientific researchers. Pebbles found in the land of the pyramids were known to have come from a huge rock, several meters across, known as the Hypatia stone, which was thought to have come from outside the planet Earth. New research into the minerals shows these rocks to be more alien and older than our sun and solar system. Israeli scientists have developed a system to replicate coal formation by heating up massive amounts of chicken feces. They claim this new development could be an alternative energy source to fossil fuel, as well as a way to put poultry waste to good use. That's it for this week's edition of the Debka Files. We'll be back with you next week for exclusive breaking news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East. Thanks for watching.